Good morning and welcome to the Budget Committee meeting for March 10th, 2021. Happy Bagpipe Day. I'd like to call this meeting to order and start as we normally do by going around the table and making sure that the audio and video is working for each of our councillors. So I'd like to start with Councillor Dago Gammon in District 1. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. From District 1, Waverley, Fall River, Musquodoboit Valley, I did not know that it was National Bagpipe Day. The first tune I learned to play was Scots Way to Wallace Blay. Anyway, so now I'm ready for Halifax Transit. Yay.
That's excellent. You can serenade us into the council chambers whenever we get back to meeting in person. I'm looking forward to it. Councillor Hensby, District 2, good morning.
Good morning, all. Looking forward to another bustling bus debate on the transit budgets. Anyway, talk to you later.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kent, District 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here and ready to roll. I just want to draw attention to my background screen for anyone who's noticing that it's changed. This is an actual depiction of Fort Clarence that is hidden beneath the ground at the Imperial Oil site. And I have a huge interest in it, and you may hear more about it in the future. I know that it's been brought up to me a number of times within the district over my course of years of representation. So I'm giving a little shout out today to say this is a hidden gem. So it's literally hidden. Thanks.
We each have many of those, and they're all wonderful. Thank you very much for bringing attention to that. Councillor Purdy, District 4.
Hi there, Mr. Chair, colleagues, everyone. Good to be here from District 4 on this another snowy little morning.
A little bit of a surprise there. Councillor Austin, District 5.
I'm here, Mr. Chair, ready to go.
Good stuff, and good morning. Councillor Mancini, District 6.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Looking forward to discuss transit. Hopefully we'll be getting more corporate yachts. Looking forward to that.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Mason, District 7. You're very faint. Nope.
How about this one?
This one's much better.
All right, we'll try that one. Hello, Mr. Chair. Here from beautiful sunny District 7. Looking forward to getting on with the transit discussion.
Good stuff. Thank you. Councillor Smith, District 8.
Hey, Chair, here from the sunny District 8 as well. Sorry again to colleagues at 11. I'll be dipping out for FCM meetings. It's our annual board and committee meetings. We'd be in the city of Prince George, British Columbia right now if COVID wasn't a thing. So shout out to the city of Prince George who'll be hosting us right now. So here to join you until 11.
Thank you. And I'm sure Prince George has a little less snow than we do. Councillor Cleary, District 9, is joining us by phone, so we will see him a little bit later. Councillor Morse, District 10.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I'm joining you from Lake Park, where we love transit. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Super. Thank you. Councillor Cuttle, District 11.
Good morning, everyone. Here in District 11, Sambro, Spryfield, Prospect Road. Nice to be here.
Good stuff. Thank you. Councillor Stoddard, District 12.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Chair, and fellow colleagues. Coming to you from District 12, nice and sunny, a little bit of dusting of snow on the ground. Looking forward to today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lovelace, District 13.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Coming to you live from Hamus Plains, St. Margaret's, where the wheels on the bus go round and round. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Blackburn, District 14.
Good morning, everybody. Looking forward to a great transit discussion this morning. And don't worry about the snow because it's supposed to be partly sunny and 14 on Friday.
Yes, absolutely looking forward to that. Should be a good snow day. Deputy Mayor Outhet, District 16.
Good morning from sunny Bedford, Wentworth, where the propellers on the ferry go round and round. So
there we go. Thank you. And Mayor Savage, good morning.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. And so at this point, item 2 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of February 17th and 19th, and also February 24th. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of both of those?
I so move.
Councillor Stoddard moves. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second, Councillor Purdy.
Second by Councillor Purdy. Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor of the minutes of February 17th and 19th and February 24th signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Super. We have approval of the minutes. A call for declaration of conflicts of interest. And hearing none, thank you. The next item on the agenda is public participation, and normally we would go to the public participation speakers list. However, for today's budget meeting, no speakers have signed up by the deadline. As a reminder to those watching from home, in order to have signed up as a speaker, the deadline was 4:30 p.m., the business day prior to this meeting. So at this point, we are on to the main item on the agenda, the Halifax transit budget discussion, and it is starting with a staff presentation. So I'd like to hand the floor to Dave Regie.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of Council. Dave Regie, Executive Director, Halifax Transit. Happy to be here today to present to you our 2021-22 budget and business plan. Just want to say I'm a big fan of transit puns, so I was really happy to hear so many this morning. Everyone's in a transit kind of mood, so that's great. And I'm here today presenting to you, but of course, one person does not make a budget, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the team that you would normally see all sitting behind me in the council chambers, but they're virtually here with us today. Patricia Hughes, Manager Customer Support, Manager Planning and Customer Engagement. Bill Cutler, who's our Manager of Transit Fleet. Mark Santilli, our Manager of Technical Services. Lynn Llewellyn, who's our Manager of Transit Operations. Kyle Wilcox, who's our Manager of Employee Support and Development. Kimberly Cusack, our Business Unit Coordinator, and Alana Buchanan, who's our Financial Business Partner, and all played key roles in preparing what we have to present to you today. Next slide, please. So the mission of Halifax Transit, working together to provide a safe, reliable, and sustainable transit system. That's what we do. That's what we embody, and I think you'll see what we have today is quite closely tied into that. Next slide, please. In terms of our service areas, the Executive Director's Office, a small but mighty team, responsible for overall leadership and support, and also as the key conduit into Regional Council through the CAO. The Accessible Bus service is an accessible door-to-door service for those who cannot use the fixed route service, the conventional service. Conventional transit is the bulk of our service. That's our fixed route transit system. Consists of local, corridor, and express routes, both urban and rural. And then finally, the ferry. I think everyone knows and loves the ferry. Certainly the most visible and probably most loved service that we provide. Next slide, please. So a number of key statistics can be found.
Dave Regie, you seem to be frozen. I'm not hearing any audio from Dave Regie. Do we have anybody else?
Question on the motion. Just kidding.
Can we reach out to Dave? And is there
I'm back.
You're back. Okay, welcome back, Dave.
Thank
He
you.
had to get a transfer.
Somebody in the house was microwaving.
Yes. I kicked everybody out of my house, so I'm not sure. Maybe the cats are up to something, but hopefully that'll be a one-time issue. So back to this slide. In terms of the transit service, key statistics found on the left side, similar to those that councillors would have seen during orientation, just providing an overview of kind of the scale of what we do. I would note that these numbers are reflective of non-COVID times. I'm hearing that I'm frozen.
You're not.
Okay.
We are hearing you and seeing you move.
Okay. Let's keep going then. So as we all know, the last year was not a typical year. Immediately following the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, conventional Conventional passenger boardings in the first quarter, being April, May, June, decreased 70% compared to the first quarter in 1920. Ferry boardings decreased 89% and accessible bus boardings decreased 74%. Overall, system-wide boardings decreased in the first quarter by 71% compared to the first quarter of 2019-20. Since that time, passenger boardings have very slowly been increasing as restrictions lifted. At this point in the fiscal year, overall boardings are down approximately 45% from where boardings were last year, and it is projected that upon year end, annual boardings will be down approximately 52% from the prior year. I also wanted to highlight the support we provide to various community groups and economic development activities as well on the right side of the slide. And although requests decreased in 2020 due to the pandemic, in recent years, Halifax Transit has supported more than 2,500 event volunteers and 200 community groups, primarily by donating free transit access and bus tickets, transit tickets. Next slide, please. Further information on this slide showing the scope of our operations at Halifax Transit. We deliver our service through a variety of fleet and infrastructure assets. And as I'd mentioned to councillors during the orientation, it's, Halifax Transit is a bit of a unique operation within a municipal environment in that we are basically a large industrial infrastructure and asset heavy and people heavy operation. So some of those numbers are reflected there. Next slide, please. Looking at successes from the past year, the rapid transit strategy, having that approved by council and submitted to the province for consideration for funding was a major milestone. Including the so looking at potential for future bus rapid transit and ferry routes, and also having the e-bus strategy, the electric bus strategy approved by council as well, and submitted to the province for consideration for funding. Transit priority corridors completed the first phases of both the Bayers Road and the Roby Street Yonge Street corridor. Children under 12 ride free. September 2019, we launched a pilot to allow children 12 years of age and under to ride all Halifax Transit services for free. The pilot is now permanent. This will facilitate more use of transit by families and encourage children to use transit, a habit which will ideally lead to continued use into adulthood. How to Ride Transit Guide, with the help of with ISANS and the municipality's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Halifax Transit launched a collection of easy to follow guides and videos in multiple languages to help familiarize new users with how to use Halifax Transit. The How to Ride materials cover information such as how to access a bus route map or schedule, how to plan a trip on the bus or ferry, how to safely board a bus, and how to pay fares. The Woodside Ferry Terminal, an ongoing project, significant renovations. The new elevators were successfully installed this year to allow the continuation of further work. And for anyone who's been through the frequent downing of the escalators there, which are quite ancient, those are actually in the process of being replaced as we speak. So I think that'll be welcome news to all users of the facility, and also to councillors whose constituents are users of the facility. Service delivery during the pandemic, I want to touch on this a bit. To say COVID turned the transit industry on its head would be a significant understatement. Staff were flexible to changing conditions, worked really hard to meet service requirements. It was declared an essential service by the province. Extra staff were hired to provide higher frequency cleaning of buses, enhanced cleaning of ferries and facilities. Things like acquiring and distributing PPE to staff, sanitizer, masks, face shields, installation of shields on bus. All this happened in such a quick period of time. We distributed approximately 40,000 masks to the public at bus and ferry terminals. And especially in the early weeks of the pandemic, decisions that might have taken days were being made in hours. Operational changes that would normally take months were happening in days. I couldn't be more proud of the team at Transit and how we pulled together to keep this essential service running through a situation none of us could have contemplated. Next slide, please. So 2021 initiatives, Fleet Transformation Project Office, which is the first steps towards electrification of the bus fleet. We do have a newly hired sustainable fleet analyst who's getting prepared for project launch once funding is secured. Accessible bus service improvements, processes and policies were reviewed and updated as needed, including updates to the registration criteria and cancellation and no-show policies. Strategic priority corridors, talked a bit about Bayers Road and Yonge Street Roby already. Halifax Transit and our partners will continue to pursue the implementation of transit priority measures on major strategic multimodal corridors. Fare management project gained council approval of the path forward and prepared for the release of a mobile ticketing RFP, which should be imminent. Actually, I'm looking early next week is my hope. You'll see that out on the road and we can get going on that. Finally, Woodside Ferry Terminal again, phase 1 is complete, phase 2 in progress, and construction will continue through 2021-2022. Next slide, please. Major planned initiatives for the upcoming year, continuing, you will notice there's a lot of overlap here. Much of what we do is multi-year. Fleet transformation, so subject to getting the funding from the provincial and federal governments. It is our plan to issue an RFP for the procurement of battery electric buses and continue work on the Ragged Lake Transit Center needed to support fleet electrification. And the RFP is actually substantially complete. So once funding is confirmed, we'll be ready to hit the go button on that. The rapid transit strategy approved in 2020. The first implementation priority is the Mill Cove Ferry. So that's another one that that we have submitted to the province for consideration of funding and through the federal government as well. This year we will complete numerous technical studies and design work to inform future implementation of the service and also site master planning as well, working with our partners in planning and development. Moving forward to the other plans, so the next large route network change will take place in November 2021. This will result in changes to more than a third of our transit routes, so it's a substantial change. The Accessible Bus Continuous Improvement Plan, the next steps on that this year will be looking at client eligibility criteria and will be reviewed to align it with functional needs. The other aspect of this, which is really exciting, is the introduction of new technology in terms of mobile data computers on all accessible bus vehicles. And this does two things for us. Provides a great source of data for us in terms of passenger utilization patterns and things like that. But also great flexibility in managing the passenger manifests or schedules in real time. So what that does is if we have an accessible bus out there and somebody cancels, that notification makes it back to our headquarters, and we can then look to add somebody else at a last-minute trip or things like that. So it's a great step forward. Accessible bus stops, we will engage a consultant to assist with preparing a full inventory of the remaining non-accessible bus stops, along with proposed improvements and costs with upgrading all stops. So we're at a point where, I think we're into the 90% range where we either a stop is fully accessible or we can at least deploy a ramp safely. We've done the easy ones, we've done the cheap ones. Now we need to get an inventory of what's left and come back with a plan in order to tackle it, so we can get to all bus stops having a level of accessibility. The fare management project. So as mentioned, hoping to have the RFP out very, very soon for the first phase of electronic fare payment. So that will be the initial focus in 21-22. And then following up on that, we'll be looking to install fare payments validators on board the bus, removing the need for visual validation by the bus operators through the mobile app. Finally, West Bedford Park and Ride, this new facility, which includes a 4-bay bus platform with heated shelters, will be constructed this year, targeting a November 2021 opening date to coincide with the major service changes. Next slide, please. Speaking specifically to diversity and inclusion, we do have several current and planned initiatives around diversity and inclusion, equitable employment, so ongoing work with stakeholders to update recruitment materials and community partners to engage underrepresented groups during the recruitment process. Accessible information, so the Moving Forward Together plan information booklets will be published in 10 languages, along with the previously mentioned How to Ride transit guide and videos. Anti-harassment, anti-racism, code of conduct education and awareness campaign. Once developed, the education and awareness campaign will be communicated broadly through new signage, website information, posters, transit shelter ads, bus ads, and social media content. Work on this is nearing completion and will be rolled out in the coming fiscal year. Diversity training, we will begin delivering a new training program titled Becoming an Ally. This diversity training will be co-facilitated by Halifax Transit trainers and employees. This training will be offered to all Halifax Transit employees through continuous training. Finally, on-demand private accessible transportation, and this is to complement existing transit taxi service in Halifax. We will procure a vendor to provide an accessible taxi-like service, which Council had recently approved. Next slide, please. Looking at some key performance indicators now, the chart on your left, passengers per hour, is an indication of overall ridership relative to the level of service provided. The second chart is related, but shown in a slightly different way, showing the change in hours, which is the hours of transit service provided to the public, and reflects the growth in service over the last few years, as well as and the trends in terms of ridership. Both charts show that we're experiencing strong growth in terms of the service being provided and the uptake in ridership. However, obviously, ridership did drop significantly in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are anticipating some recovery in 21-22, but don't expect to be back to 2019 levels until a few years out at least. Next slide, please. So the annual service plan, this represents the second last year of implementing the Moving Forward Together plan, Halifax Transit's network redesign. Until COVID-19, Halifax Transit saw significant ridership increases, largely due to the success of the Moving Forward Together plan. Fiscal 19-20 saw the largest single service change in Halifax Transit's modern history, and significant ridership increases accompanied that. Changes that were planned for last year, 2021, were deferred to fiscal year 2021-22 because of COVID-19 related budget restrictions and resource availability. Fiscal year 2021-22 will see changes primarily on the Dartmouth side of the harbour, Eastern Passage, Cole Harbour, Dartmouth. There are also some changes on the Halifax Peninsula, Bedford West, and Spryfield areas. The final two implementations this year and next year will complete the route network, which will form the basis for a fixed route transit system for decades to come in HRM. And just to note, in previous years, service changes were implemented primarily in Halifax, Bedford, and Sackville. Next slide, please. So moving into the numbers, this slide highlights the various expense and revenue categories within the budget and compares the March and June 2020 budgets to the proposed 21-22 budget. Budgeted 21-22 expenses have increased by approximately $10 million from the recast COVID budget, but are approximately $300,000 under the original 2020 budget approved in March of last year. Meanwhile, 21-22 budgeted revenues have increased by $11.7 million compared to the June recast budget, but are $8.3 million below the March 2020 approved budget, mainly due to fare revenue not expected to be at pre-COVID levels for 21-22, and I'll have a little more information on that coming up. The main categories, main reasons for increased expenses are compensation and benefits, new positions, and salary adjustments, most of which are dictated through collective agreements at $3.9 million. External services, $659,000. That includes the new accessible taxi program, increases in snow removal, and also increases in janitorial costs related to cost increases and more cleaning requirements. Supplies around $540,000, contract increases in the cost of uniforms, cleaning and PPE in response to COVID-19. Building costs, that element comes in around $600,000, and this is primarily rate increases of electricity, natural gas, as well as some other interior building costs. Finally, vehicle expenses, $2.4 million. So that includes an increase in fuel, repair and maintenance costs, tires, but also there's kind of a one-off in here, an increase for an additional ferry refit. So for the information of council, 5 harbor ferries under Transport Canada regulations, each one is required to go through a major refit every 4 years. So what that, with 5 ferries and a 4-year cycle, every couple of years we will have to do 2 refits. So that's why there's budget for an additional refit in here, and that's so that's reflected in this, and you'll see that further down in some of the ferry specific numbers. Next slide, please. So breaking it down by service level overview, this table provides a service area budget for the various divisions within Halifax Transit. I've spoken to most of this on the other slides and won't dwell here too long, but did want to speak again to the increases in ferry. It looks like a big number there, but that does tie back to this being an odd year where we have to do 2 dry docking refits in a single year, and that will smooth itself out next year. The conventional service increase is a net of increased expenditures, as previously noted, as well as reduced fare revenue. The excessive bus reduction shown here largely due to adding a credit for vacancy management. No material impact on service. It's really more of an accounting correction at this point. And there was also a bit of a decrease in fuel and maintenance costs for that fleet. Next slide, please. Looking at staff counts, the bulk of new positions proposed in this budget are term cleaning staff that we're employing due to extra COVID cleaning procedures. The remaining positions are tied to service growth or increased demands for service and project delivery. And just a note, the staff directly related to the Moving Forward Together plan expansion were included in the wage model last year in anticipation of the Moving Forward Together plan expansion. As this expansion was deferred to this year, these positions are available for use, but aren't reflected in the chart because they were already in our wage model from last year. Next slide, please. So I did cover off significant budget changes in a previous slide. This slide does provide a bit more detail on a line-by-line basis. 2 key items I want to expand on. The first is around fare revenue. So just a bit of insight into what our assumptions are around fare revenue for the coming year and how we expect it to rebound. We are anticipating UPass returning to about 90% as of this September. And that's what we're hearing from the universities. It sounds like in-person learning is likely coming. The Department of Community Services passes at 100% of 1920 numbers. Through conversations with them, we do feel confident in that number. In terms of general fare revenue, the assumption is 60% of pre-COVID numbers for the first quarter, and then an average of 65% for the remainder of the year. So we are, right now we are around 52 to 55%. So I think those are pretty conservative numbers that we've used, which I think is wise given some of the uncertainty. But with a lot of the optimism, faster rollouts of vaccines and that, I do feel comfortable with those numbers, and there is a chance that they'll be actually low, but we'll see how it goes as the year goes on. Just also want to note the funding for the accessible taxi program. There is $220,000 noted here. That's for the estimated cost of the contract, assuming a November 2021 start, and that does include $55,000 in compensation for the person that will administer the program. Next slide, please. So looking at pressures, 3 pressures identified. Fuel pressure. Fuel's always a bit of a pressure and a risk for us because the markets, the global markets are what they are. So the amount that we have, the amount we've identified here is the difference between the budget assumption of 53 cents per liter compared to the current price per liter of 67 cents. And that's an item we monitor every year through the year as the fuel prices fluctuate. Ridership recovery, I spoke to that. So yeah, if the $2.6 million there is kind of what I would consider to be a worst case scenario between what we've assumed in the budget and if ridership just stays where it is now for the entire next year. I think that's a pretty low risk, and that 2.6 million is a big figure, but I don't think that's a reality. I think that's we just put that there to kind of illustrate what that kind of worst case could be. And then finally, around facility conditions, aging infrastructure, it's kind of an ongoing state of good repair battle to keep things in good shape. And there's always the risk of some sort of failure that generates an extra cost that wasn't expected. Next slide, please. And I believe that is all for me. So thank you very much, and happy to be here to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for that in-depth presentation, and I'm sure Councillor Mancini will appreciate you ending on a shot of the corporate yacht. I'd like to hand it over to Councillor Hensby right now to put the motion on the floor and then proceed with questions.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman. I'll put the motion forward that the Budget Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to incorporate the Halifax Transit proposed 2021-22 budget and business plan as set out and discussed in the March 2nd, 2021 staff report and supporting presentation by staff, and with the transit service modifications as proposed in the accompanying annual service plan into the draft 2021-22 operating budget. So
Second by Mancini.
Seconded by Councillor Mancini. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
I'm pretty sure that Dave Reggie knows my first question. I've always talked about the Rural Express service, the promise that was made back in regional plan, and I know there's been service adjustments and limitations, but exit 18 deserves to have a park and ride terminal. The bus right now, the 370 goes right by it from exit 20. It would not be difficult at all to implement a park and ride terminal at exit 18 and have it still within the serviceable boundary that has been set up back in whatever day it was they put the limitations on transit service. So I'll be asking for that at least to be coming forward in some form or fashion. This year could take a look at buying the land and planning the design for it. That'll take a year in itself. Next year, you can look at the construction of the terminal, and the third year implementing service. So I think that it's not an unreasonable request to ask for. And also with the Ross Road realignment, I still need to say there's an opportunity for us to incorporate a park and ride terminal at that strategic intersection and have 4 buses converge at one spot and have transferability for the Preston, Westfall, Lawrencetown communities. Right now, there's no direct connectivity for those communities. Having a park and ride terminal will give that connectivity that's been so dearly missed. And so hopefully the Ross Road realignment will finally realize that potential for park and ride. I see we only have 13 park and ride parking lots. I've always been saying those are the crown jewels of our transit service. Most of the parking lots are jam full. We should be expanding them or expanding the number of park and ride terminals. I know we have one in Bedford West finally being established. We've finally got one in Martin Drive being established soon. We need more of them, and I think that the strategic locations we should be looking at. I think the end of Dunbrack Street, formerly Northwest Arm Drive, should have one there in the Spryfield area, right there, the Long Lake Pond, Long Lake parking lot. Right now, there's a small site there, but you can put a nice park and ride terminal there. It'd be a great spot for one. The ferries, I've been saying for years that we should have at least 2 ferries per terminal. Only having 5 kind of puts us in a difficult position where 1 or 2 go down for servicing. We have a very limited stock to go around. We should try and go after the federal and provincial governments for infrastructure funding to boost the number of ferries that we have. If we're going to have more terminals, out in the Bedford Cove area, in Dartmouth Cove area, and Burnside. We need to have more capacity. So I'd like to see more of that. The fuel consumption. I believe there's some information been shared in regards to the use of potential use of green fuel. This is I believe it's a wood additive for fuel. I know in the past we tried biofuel with fish oil and stuff like that, and it didn't work out too well because it congealed in cold weather. But the green fuel, I think it's an opportunity we should look at trying to reduce our emissions and also be green responsibly, I guess you could say. I know we're eventually going to electric buses, but in the meantime, a green fuel is a good alternative source that we should be looking at doing. I'll leave it there for now. I got another half a dozen questions, but I'm sure that I'll give some time for Dave to answer those ones, and I'll come back with my other ones. Mainly Musk Rider and a few other things.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. Mr. Riggi.
Thank you. So through the chair, and I guess I'll start with the last one, the green fuel. I hadn't heard of that, Councillor, but I know Bill Cutler, our transit fleet manager, is here and listening. So certainly we can go away and have a look at that. It's not something I'm familiar with, but certainly can check into that. So in terms of, some of the other questions, when it comes to Exit 18, you're really, at this point, there wouldn't be anything in this year's budget on it. We've received no council direction to pursue something like that. So, I mean, ultimately, though, that law, as you know, was removed during a previous iteration of the regional plan when the designation of those areas under the regional plan changed. So, I mean, ultimately, if council wishes to have a service like that put in and gives us direction, then we will work it into the plans. The other thing I would note, just in terms of looking at park and ride lots and the order of things, there are two. So West Bedford, I mentioned, will be built this year. And then the next one in the plan is actually at Murchison Road to be done. So that, that's as of now, that's the council direction we have and the kind of standing order we have. And that's, that's the direction that we are proceeding under. Just in terms of Ross Road specifically, I know there's some work going on within our colleagues at Planning and Development on looking at that. So, certainly we can be involved in those conversations to see what's possible and what fits into plans. Oh, and maybe in terms of the ferry, just, we do carry an extra ferry. 1 out of 5 does work out to a 20% spare ratio. We did have some issues recently where we had 2 ferries down. That is fairly unusual. It doesn't happen very often. So I think, personally with a 5 ferry fleet, I am pretty comfortable with that spare ratio. Obviously, as we move into future ferry projects, we'll be sure to carry spares there as well, especially given that it would likely will be a different type of ferry for, say, a route like Mill Cove.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your team. My first question is, you alluded to what's taken place, the logistics of COVID-19 and the shields and PPE and all that. My first question is, well, how are your operators doing? And those that support the operators, the mechanics and stuff. When COVID-19 first arrived on the scene, there was a lot of uncertainty for everybody, but particularly your operators. And there were many issues that we've worked hard on. But today, how are the operators doing, and those that support the operators?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. When you look at a workforce as large and diverse as Halifax Transit, I think it would be challenging for me to kind of summarize that into how they're all doing. I think, certainly it's been a challenging situation for everybody involved. The operators are on the front line. They are certainly seeing a lot of it. So, I think different people handle it differently, and the best thing we can do as an organization, though, is to make sure that we do have all the required safety precautions in place. And that our supervisory and leadership team is there to provide the staff, to support the staff through the challenging times. So, I think like anybody, there's probably ups and downs, but, on the whole, the workforce is doing a fantastic job keeping the service going through some crazy, challenging circumstances.
It's interesting, Dave, your operators in particular and the support group, throughout our communities, right? They're our neighbors, they're our friends. We see them at the grocery store, we see them at the rink, and so on. And so I know it's been challenging to them, and I thank them every time I get a chance for what they're doing. And so I think it's important we always continue to ask and support them. So my main question, I have a few, but of course, Accessibus, Dave. Like Councillor Hensby, you know what he's going to ask you about. You know what I'm probably going to ask you about too is Accessibus. And look, we've come a long way when it comes to improving our Accessibus, and I've been proud of the work that you and your team have done. You alluded in your presentation about the improvements that are coming in place. Could you speak again about the improvements and what we're expecting those improvements to do? And really, the bottom line, how are those improvements going to impact those that need to use Accessibus service? And I'm also looking for the time frames. I know we've had some delays. We've had some personnel delays. COVID probably doesn't happen. I'm looking for what's that time frame of these new improvements that you're going to share with us. Because I don't know, I missed your orientation meeting with the new councillor, so I don't know if you spoke about Accessibus in any detail. So if you could share with us again today what those improvements are, timeline, and the impact, please.
Certainly. So there's two main areas of improvements in the plan for this year, and the intent is that both would happen this year, or sorry, the upcoming fiscal year 21-22. So the first one's around eligibility criteria. So eligibility criteria is it basically lays out who is eligible to use Accessibus versus using the fixed route conventional service. So our criteria hasn't really been touched in decades. It still reflects things like, if someone, for example, couldn't walk up 3 stairs, they would automatically be eligible for Accessibus. Well, that's very outdated because our buses don't have stairs anymore. So that's just one example. So going through that, and the moving to a functional ability based criteria, which really the end goal of that is to make sure that people that need Accessibus will have a priority to use Accessibus, and if there's people that maybe 20 years ago would have had to use Accessibus, but now could use the fixed route system, that's reflected in our eligibility criteria. So that's work that will be undertaken this year. The other one is around technology. So basically right now, when we send our Accessibus drivers out to do their shift for the day, they get a what's called a passenger manifest. So, it lays out that you're picking up this person here, taking them there, lays their day out. It's literally a piece of paper we give them because we just don't have any technology around that. So by putting a mobile data terminal on each bus, they will get a digital passenger manifest. And that allows the folks working back in the office to shift things around if needed. Again, like the big example I can use is that if we have a cancellation right now, it can be really challenging to kind of fill that in close to real time. Whereas with this digital system, say a last minute cancellation comes in, we can go through and find someone else who maybe had just called in and try to slot them in. So the end result of a system like that is that it should provide much more flexibility for those last minute trips. That's really what the passengers will see out of this. And in terms of the overall plan, both of those are planned to happen within the next fiscal. As you'd allude to, Councillor, a lot has changed. Differences, COVID has had an impact, and changes in staff, and just learning more as we go along. So one thing I've been speaking with my manager of transit operations, Lynn Llewellyn, is coming back to Transportation Standing Committee with a bit of a status update, just in terms of where we are, if there's things that need to shift or be adapted in a different direction, where we want to go with that. So you can expect to see that coming to Transportation Committee in the coming year.
I have more questions, but I'll come back. I don't know, my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jacob Yemen.
I'm having a little trouble with the mute button, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. You're good to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dave. You probably are expecting to see me today with my question. I do have a couple of questions. One is specific to District 1, and it is to the Route 55 in Waverley. And we've had some good conversations about it, which I very much appreciate. So it's in year 4 of the plan and the change, and the community of Craigburn and Keating have been very upset about the change, because the need to go in through Crevburn is a result of Halifax Transit needing a loop, not necessarily that the community has wanted to have the bus there. And I do know that there are a lot of concerns that the community had. There was a community meeting, a petition was given, the petition was given to council, but unfortunately, COVID was ramping up and the election came, and so there was no specific ask to council when the petition was given. There was, a behind the scenes, I know with staff that you guys were working on a plan, but implementing that plan or that response didn't get to come to fruition. The community would really like to see another option and a consideration done. So I'm wondering, because they didn't get a response, because there were some issues, because it's the 4th year in a plan, and that, we've got Port Wallace coming up, we're making a plan for that without ridership. I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity to be able to come back, look at what's happening in that Route 55, engage with the community, and consider any other plan and give them a good response to what their petition and their concerns were. Mr. Chair, procedurally, I don't know, is there an opportunity for me to ask, that Regional Council request a report responding to the residents' concerns around the plan change to Route 55 to serve Crevburn Drive, and outlining other options that were considered and may be considered for the area? I know the implementation time is not till November, so hopefully there's a window here that we can use to be able to get that response.
You can either ask for a supplemental report here, or you can ask for a full report of council, and the supplemental report is expedited. It is not as full and doesn't have as much rigor as the full report of council, and it might be back in time for the closure of the budget discussions.
Dave, I would defer a little bit to you on, what is possible. You say that the full reports, Mr. Chair, would take longer?
It would take longer. It goes through more steps for approval. Yes. Okay.
So, maybe I can jump in then. So through the chair. So yeah. So if there's a desire to kind of outline in a single place or a single report, any further information around, the rationale for this, and what other options were considered, and that, certainly we can do that in the form of a supplemental information report, specifically items that have no budget implications. So we could certainly do that, and I think expedite that to get it back before, before final budget approval. I say anything, if there was anything that had budget implications, like if there was a thought about leaving the route as is, just to put an example out there, I think that become a parking lot item, I believe, and then we would end up writing a briefing note related to that. So I think from our perspective, we can certainly provide that information if that's the desire in a supplemental information report.
An information report would not give us any change. It would just be answering. And so I think that what the community really deserves to have is a bit more engagement to see, is there another option, as well as the response to the information. So, to the petition.
Right. So I think, in terms of options, we are very limited in options. No budget implication options would be either turning on a different set of streets in the area, which, really just probably moves, if there's a concern, it probably just moves the concern and ends up shortening the route. Not to preempt what might be in the report, but I know there was conversation about possibly turning on a piece of private land, which is very problematic and probably not actually a valid option. And then, so the only other option that's kind of out there is to leave the route as is, which then is into budget implications and would need to go the briefing route, the parking lot and briefing note path.
Okay.
So would you like some time to consider it and then come back? You are at 5 minutes.
I would very much appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a bunch of things I'm going to try and compress into 5 minutes so I don't have to come back. Before I get to them, I will say to Councillor Daigle-Gammon, my suggestion would be to ask for an information report that would, or a briefing note that could include what options there are to engage with the community and have that discussion, so that you continue to move it forward. But at this point, we can't tell them what to do until any of those things are done. I want to thank Dave and his team. The drivers, the operators, the folks who clean the chandlers, the back of house staff and the front line staff. The back of house staff had to redo the schedule. It feels like a dozen times, but I think it was only 3 or 4 times. And usually, as we're seeing with moving forward together, massive changes of schedules, now admittedly that includes changing routes, can take years. And this has happened, the schedule has been changed several times in one operating year. And it's really been an amazing effort by everybody. And, I know, I'm just going to say for the record, things have gotten heated at points with some people who are advocating on behalf of the operators. And I assure anybody who's listening from the union or who drives a bus or is a crew of a ferry that everybody on council wants to make sure all staff for HRM are safe at all times. And that's been a primary concern of ours all the way along. To the council, I would say, it's important, especially with transit. I would say, poor Dave, more than anybody, it's important to remember with transit that a budget time is not deciding what we're going to do. It's staff coming in saying, okay, you told us you want this and this is how we're going to do it and this is how we're going to pay for it and how much it costs. So a lot of the things that I'm hearing today are real issues in communities, but they're things that need to be addressed through Transportation Standing Committee, and they need to be addressed through motions at council that are long tail. Like changes in service are long processes. This is not something that happens in a motion we bring to the floor today. It's something that happens and has reports and comes forward in time, right? So if you want a bus route and you've been saying it for 10 years, but you haven't been able to get council to vote to fund the bus route or to have the bus route, this is not the time for that. This is not where those things happen. We have a plan and we're implementing a plan and we're measuring how well it's being implemented and how we're missing parts, nuances, right? Like, where's the bus going to turn around? I think that is actually something we should be talking about today. So, it's interesting too, because when we get to this point in budget, it's hard, I think, on all the transit management and staff, because we're talking about the things we don't like, and we're not talking about the things we do like. That we have this massive moving forward together plan that, while not popular with everybody, has exceeded all expectations in terms of doing exactly what council asked for, and ridership is up across the system, and especially on the new corridor routes, and more than we ever thought it would, which is something that we need to continue to remind ourselves that we have a plan, we stuck to the plan, and the plan has worked very well, and service for people, not in the core, but all over. The Herring Cove bus has thousands of new riders in the system, and that's fantastic. So I guess my questions are around battery electric buses and fare management. Those are the two things that really stood out for me. I've already started tweeting about it. Battery electric buses, my fear is, Dave, that we will get some money for Ragged Lake. We may not be as close as we need to be for Burnside. Burnside is on the outs. It's not even on the 4-year capital plan right now. And I think Ragged Lake Transit Center can, what's its capacity if it was all electric buses? It's only 50 or 60, I think, right? I mean, I'd like clarification. I know we're expanding it, because my fear is that we're going to have a capacity gap as we convert to battery electric, where we could make them all battery electric for the first 2 years, and then Ragged Lake is full and we haven't done Burnside yet. So my second question is there a possibility of having an interim charging solution in Burnside, or is that just simply off the table? Do we need to replace the garage to be able to have the infrastructure to put hundreds of amps per bus into, even dozens of buses? It would never be hundreds of buses in the existing building. I can't imagine. And then the second thing is, can you tell me a little bit more about the timing on the fare system? Because that's certainly something the public was really excited about when we talked about it at TSC. When are we going to be able to pay? Show that we paid with our phones, basically, is like a big question that we're getting. And when are we going to move to the new ticketing system? So those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you for your comments as well, and thank you for your questions, Councillor. So through the chair, so in terms of battery electric buses, so The initial project for electrification will put 60 at Ragged Lake. The total capacity of that garage at that point will be about 240. If that were to become completely electric, though, that does drop a bit because there is a bit more space required when you have electric chargers and that. So, I think where we are right now certainly recognize there's a need to get going on Burnside, and there are, there's some conversations happening, initial conversations about maybe how that could happen. But it's a great point. Once we get through Ragged Lake, what is that interim solution? Is it further electrification at Ragged Lake, where we already will be set up there? Is there something interim at Burnside? All to say, I don't have the answer to that, but it is certainly on our mind, and we're trying to think about how we can, once we get through that first 60, how can we keep going without having a big interruption? So we're still figuring that out. In terms of electric fare payment, so the RFP, like I say, hopefully going out next week. Everything we're hearing is that these are usually relatively quick turnarounds. Like you could be 3 to 4 months even, potentially, hopefully, depending on the vendor and how quick we can act, because there's not a lot of back end. It's largely in their end usually. So that's the first phase where somebody could basically buy a single ticket, a monthly pass, whatever the case may be, on their phone. They're visibly going to show it to the operator like they would for with a paper pass now. And then the next phase is actually getting to having a small scanner on the bus that they just scan their phone and it goes ding and off they go. And it's that simple. So yeah, we're quite optimistic about being able to get the first phase of that up and running specifically quite quickly, because there's no real hardware or anything to install. It's a pretty quick, simple solution.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Dave. Thanks so much for this presentation. And I just want to echo the sentiments to your team. This past year has been very difficult, and especially the drivers, the extra work that's involved with the cleaning and the uncertainty and the changes and so on. So I just want to thank everyone at Halifax Transit for the great work that they've been doing. That at Hubley Centre, it is much loved service. Obviously this year there's been a drop in ridership because of the situation, but we've seen a really good positive response from the public to the Hubley Centre Park and Ride, and also to the Simmerley Park and Ride. Looking forward to the Bedford West or West Bedford. I'm never quite sure what the correct title is, but the CP Allen. I can see that there will be a little bit of an issue for those who are on Hamas Plains Road, perhaps a potential delay getting over to Lacewood, but at the end of the day, I think there are a lot more options, which is what we need. We need options. So this morning, because I don't have a whole lot of time, I'm just going to jump right into my question. I am looking at the inputs for ridership. How do we increase the ridership? Well, obviously we need to have access. And I think overall, we're thinking about accessibility, from an accessibility perspective, removing the steps and so on. But I also think that we need to think about access to stops and thinking about where those stops should actually be. And so when I looked in your report and I was thinking about, what is that perspective from when we prioritize where those stops are. And a case in point is the stop that's at 1848 Hamas Plains Road, but not further up the road, where we have 3 places of business that operate throughout the entire year with well over 100 employees. If we think with the lens about transit from an economic development perspective, that bus stop would be right there where the cluster of businesses are. Instead, we have businesses for 20 plus years who continue to have difficulty getting employees because the people have to walk, a kilometer more to get to the stop on a highway where people are going 80 plus kilometers. So I am concerned when I think about how is it that Halifax Transit is prioritizing the best possible place for those bus stops. So I do hope that we continue to investigate, where is the best place for those bus stops. The other thing that I'm concerned about from another input for ridership is a safe and enjoyable experience. We know in particular women and young girls often experience harassment, well, wherever we are, but that being said, I think that we need to do a better job with Halifax Transit to address the harassment that women and girls experience on transit, on buses, on ferries, and have a concentrated effort to stop that and make it completely aware to all riders that it's unacceptable. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to those two inputs that, I think if we address those two things in particular, we would see an increase in ridership. And, obviously there's a lot more work to do, but I'll stop talking and ask you about those two issues. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor. So through the chair, so on the, I'll start with your second question around harassment. So yes, certainly agree, absolutely agree that, that's an environment that needs to exist on transit to make people comfortable using the system. And, one of the big things we do have coming this year is the anti-harassment, anti-racism code of conduct campaign, which is going to be a significant public push to really push that information out there, hoping to spark some conversations around that. And, and really, that's kind of the major public push. And then, also, it wasn't in my budget presentation. We were approached by an organization that's looking to pilot some bystander training, and around that. So we're also having those conversations as well. So certainly agree there, and those would be some of the major things we have coming up this year on that front. So in terms of bus stops, so I could probably speak for about a half an hour on what goes into choosing where our bus stop goes, but nobody would find that interesting but me and maybe Patricia. So it's so what it and maybe the chair as well. So what it comes down to, there's numerous safety items we have to take into account in terms of visibility, site stopping distances, all things like that. But in general terms, we do always try to place bus stops as close to major trip generators as we can, while maintaining all the safety aspects that are necessary. So I'm not aware of the specific example that you raised, but certainly we are, the team is here listening, and we can certainly go have a look at that and see what's going on in that specific case.
Thanks. I'd appreciate that, because I know at 1948 Chemist Plains Road, thinking about the difficulty in getting employees, to that location, and also the crest, that people have to go way up the hill to get the bus or come down the hill. So I really appreciate having a look at from a safety perspective. Let's get those people to work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Dave, for the presentation. For some of the newer councillors, I got to say that it's coming up on a year or so since HRM was locked down because of COVID, and in those very early days, it's coming up on a 1-year anniversary for that. And I was as serving as deputy mayor last year, I was involved in our morning conference calls, and these took place every morning in the initial phases of lockdown, and they went on for 2, sometimes 3 hours. And I got to tell you, I picked up some newfound respect for Dave and the work that he does at Transit, because the way that he approached this whole problem, and working in conjunction with his drivers and his staff, it was top drawer professionalism. And so I just wanted to say that right off the top, Dave. Just some quick questions. We have returned to all service levels pre-COVID, correct? Okay. And I'm just wondering if you guys are planning a study to find out where our passengers have gone. Do you have any data to indicate that have people turned their backs on transit altogether, or is it just because they're working from home and not using transit? Just wondering if there's a campaign that's going to be following that's going to be coming soon, just a welcome back to transit type of thing. So that was my first set of questions. And then finally, wondering about data analysis and how this is going to work going forward. You know, when you look at future service additions, reductions, that sort of thing, how are we going to look at 2020, 21 going forward? I mean, is that set of data and numbers just going to be tossed out because it's just not reliable? Or, because I mean, I would just hate to be in a situation where a route would be reduced based on numbers that don't accurately reflect the true ridership. So I throw that in your court, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And first, let me just thank you for your kind words. And I just wanted to say, though you heard me on a daily basis, just, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say I had a strong team behind me, giving me all the advice and support needed to give that information to council. So thank you. I really do appreciate your comments. So in terms of data in 2021, I mean, no, we certainly wouldn't be recommending any reduction of routes based on 2021 data. It's such an anomaly year, you kind of have to throw it out. I think what will be interesting is as things slowly grow back, there's a bit of a conversation about, you know, I think we end up having to adjust our expectations of how routes are going to perform. So even next year, probably a good chunk of our routes are going to be under the ridership guidelines. And I think that's just, we have to maintain that context as we go forward. I mean, generally we weren't looking at kind of recommending any major changes until the moving forward together plan was done and had kind of settled in for about a year, let things settle out, see how it all is working. And then, you know, we're probably into our next, you know, 5-year plan process after that. So I think, yeah, in terms of data, no worries if a route didn't perform this year. Most of them didn't. So I don't think we'd be recommending any reductions based on that. In terms of where do the people go, that's the billion-dollar question in the transit industry, and probably the $2 billion question is when will they come back and will they come back? And that's, so I mean, I'm involved with the Canadian Urban Transit Association at a national level. Like, those conversations are happening nationally. We can glean some data from the fact that car traffic has returned more quickly than transit ridership. So obviously that's concerning to me and concerning to our integrated mobility team. So that's one insight. I think the other one is, though, you know, is everyone going to come back? I mean, the federal government's a major source of ridership for us, and basically none of them are working, you know, in the offices. You students are another huge source of ridership. So I think it's really going to be about kind of taking it year by year, see how things are returning. I certainly think we can do some surveys to get a sense of whether people are just still, at your point, still working at home, or, you know, when we, in the early days of the pandemic, as you mentioned, we were basically, you know, everything turned sideways, and we're saying, don't take transit. So, you know, was that message too good? And now we have to kind of reverse that message with the public. So those are all things certainly we'll be working on in the coming years. Definitely going to need some ridership campaigns. But I do think, you know, continuing with the improvements under the Moving Forward Together plan and ultimately the rapid transit strategy is a key part of that, because ultimately you need that service to entice people to come back. So I certainly, you know, applaud council and thank council for their continued support in terms of continuing to improve the service, even though ridership is down, because I do think that will pay off in the end.
Right. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would just like to echo my colleagues' comments and congratulate you, Dave, and the entire team at Metro Transit for the extraordinary efforts that you went to last year and continue to make to keep the transit service running through these very difficult times. I guess just in terms of following up on Councillor Blackburn and what we were just saying about building back the service, I'm wondering what you're considering in terms of making things more pleasant for people to take transit, and if you're looking at something as practical or basic as more bus shelters. Because when you're deciding whether to go to work and it's pouring rain, the thought of going to the bus where there's no bus shelter and being dressed in wet clothes for the morning. It may put people off taking the bus. And my understanding is that we only add 5 bus shelters a year throughout HRM. And so I'm thinking maybe it could be part of this budget. Maybe it's too late, I don't know, but maybe it could be part of this budget to expand those bus shelters. They can also add safety features if you're traveling early in the morning or at night. You feel a little safer in a bus shelter if it's lit, especially. So I'm just thinking that this, putting a little more emphasis on the comfort of riders and having more bus shelters available might be one way to improve ridership.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. So through the chair, certainly appreciate that. And so one piece of information I can share is that the way we do shelters is that they're managed under a contract. So all maintenance and that is we don't pay for any of that basically in return for advertising, and we get some advertising revenue. So there is some stipulations in there around number of shelters and that. That contract's actually up in September, so we will have an opportunity to revisit that. I think there's opportunity for growth there. That would be kind of the first step. One of the bigger challenges, actually the biggest challenge beyond that in placing shelters isn't so much budget, because shelters aren't really that expensive. I mean, we could triple the budget and it would be a bit of a rounding error on the whole Halifax Transit budget. But the bigger challenge we do run into is actually available right-of-way space. And we when we look at the list of where there's requests for shelters and where they'd make a lot of sense, we do run into cases where the municipally owned right-of-way is actually so narrow we can't fit a shelter. So then we end up having to get into negotiating license or lease agreements with adjacent landholders, which is totally doable, and we do it. It just makes things take a lot longer than if we can just plunk one down in the right of way. So certainly appreciate that comment. I've stood in the rain myself waiting for the bus, so I know what that's all about. And the more we can do there. And the other comment I'd make in terms of comfort is, we have over the years really tried to transform at least our major transfer points and our major terminals into much more comfortable places for all the great reasons that you mentioned, Lake Lacewood Terminal being one. And when I think back to what the old bridge terminal was that I commuted through going to university versus what we have now, it's just night and day. So, certainly multiple ways of approaching that.
Okay, could I follow up briefly?
Absolutely, you've got a minute and a half.
Okay, so if we wanted to have input into how it goes forward with more bus shelters, renewing the contract in September, how would we do that?
I think the best thing would be just to get in touch with myself, and we can certainly take that forward into the contract process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dave. This is I certainly appreciate the approach that you've taken with this report and to help us each within our areas sort of hone in on the district implications and such. And you're probably sitting there waiting for the onslaught of questions and concerns that I have around transit within District 3. Absolutely, I totally get, and I really appreciate having the data to support it and your thoughts on the implications of COVID-19. I think that it is a very real experience that our taxpayers and our transit riders need to understand are influencing the current the projections of the next stage. I do believe, though, that and I do believe that changes are necessary. Sorry about that. Let me just turn that down. That changes are necessary, and we all have to accept that. When I look at this list, what it becomes glaringly obvious to me, and I want to point this out to everyone, is that out of this 26 recommendations of change under the groupings of A, B, and C, we have around 26 routes that have some implications of change. District 3 is pretty heavy. We're talking 8 out of the 26. District 3 has, you know, a little less than 25% of the change is recommended, let alone what I'm not a numbers person quickly. So what that would mean to the other councillors who probably have very few. So that's a big hit, and some of the hits I'm a little concerned about. I will go through some more very specific questions, but I'm wondering at this moment, can you kind of set the stage for me to help me understand, because you've said it very specifically in proposed service adjustments that the focus of changes will be in the 16 routes surrounding the Portland Hills Terminal, and much of that is within District 3. So just give me a little bit of sense of what is it that you saw in this area and on this focus that kind of precipitated and supports the heavy changes within the District 3 area, just to help me set the stage for some of my upcoming questions on specific routes, if you could. Let's start there.
Sure. So thanks for the question, Councillor, through the chair. So I guess in terms of, you know, these changes, maybe if I can back up. So this year is basically the Dartmouth side of the harbor. But, you know, last year, or not last year, the last implementation we did was a very similar level of change, but in the Bedford-Sackville area. And the year before that was a similar level of change, but in the, you know, Halifax, Clayton Park area. So it's not that there was anything specific, I guess, in District 3 that precipitated change. It's changed throughout the municipality. This year just happens to be the Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage. It's your turn for the implementation. You know, one of the biggest changes around like Portland Hills specifically is right now we have a mishmash of different routes to provide service between Portland Hills and in downtown. So really straightening that out a bit, it'll be a single corridor route going from Portland Hills to downtown. So the Route 5 will provide a consistent, easy to understand service rather than trying to figure out 4 different bus routes. Now there's only one. And then all those other routes that used to you know, perhaps go directly downtown will now feed in at Portland Hills and at Penhorn Terminal to that corridor route, which would be a high frequency route, and feed passengers into there. So that's part of the move to having that kind of corridor and feeder system that we've been doing throughout the city. Again, this just happens to be you know, the year for Eastern Passage, Cole Harbour, and Dartmouth. Now the other thing, and what I'm actually most excited about out of all of this, is that we'll be introducing express routes throughout the area. So throughout Woodlawn, Cole Harbour. So basically at rush hour, all of these routes that run through like Woodlawn, like you'll see them in the annual service plan as like, you know, 158, 159. All of these routes that just stay within their local neighborhoods during, you know, outside of rush hour. At rush hour, they will all be direct express routes to downtown. So providing a significant improvement in service to people. It's basically, you know, the Metrolink service was very, very popular, very successful. We're taking that and we're basically improving it and extending it out into the local neighborhood. So somebody can now get on. You know, I'll use the 158 as an example that runs through your neighborhood or your district, and so someone who would now currently get on that bus and have to transfer at rush hour to get downtown, they can get on in their neighborhood and you know, have a seat, and next thing you know, they're downtown. They don't have to change buses. They don't have to do anything like that. So at those busiest times of day, when the buses are the fullest, that's when we have those extra express routes in place to get people to where they're going quickly. And again, it's basically bringing Dartmouth, Cole Harbour into the same sort of structure that already exists in other suburban communities like Sackville and Clayton Park and that, Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful.
Do I have any other time left, Mr. Chair? I'll just add in while he's looking that I am thrilled that pleased that Councillor Lovelace brought up the experience for women on transit. It is an area of concern for me as well, and I appreciate that you have a good plan forward, I think, to well, at least I'm looking forward to seeing it as it rolls out to determine if it's a good plan to address it. And ultimately, it's around safety. It's around respect. It's around value for women in a public space that should be a given. It should be it is a right, and we all need to be reminded of that. And if there's a way to keep to bring back the experience of safety and comfort on our buses for our women, I absolutely am all for it. And anything I can do to engage with you, just throw that out there. I'd be happy to be involved in supporting the efforts that we are working on in that regard. I'll save my questions for my next round, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dave. And I also lend my support, anything I can do to help inform making a bus ride safer for women and girls. Absolutely. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for your team and all of those amazing workers that have done this work all year when the world's gone crazy and so fearful, and yet the courage and bravery and work ethic. So thank you. My question is about public engagement, and what are the forums for the public to engage and put input into transit routes? Because like residents of their neighborhoods and areas are kind of like the experts on how and it should work. And you know, people who take transit who think, oh, this might work better if they thought of it this way. And I did hear a lot of that when I was canvassing before I was elected. Just people with great ideas. And I know that a big department like transit can't, you know, accommodate everyone's ideas. Obviously, I mean, there's so much more involved in routes. But what is the forum for the public to engage? Is it 311? Is that the only place that the public can put their ideas in for consideration? And are there regular engagements that can happen with the public? And how does that work? I was just wondering, how do people get a chance to input into the real life decisions that can really affect them?
Great. Thanks for the question, Councillor, through the chair. So I guess one thing I would say is that, you know, you're correct. Obviously, we can't accommodate every suggestion we hear, but we can certainly listen to every suggestion we hear, and that's what we do. We do consult and engage with the public in a number of different ways. You know, one would be specific project based. So whenever we have a project that has public interest, you know, there's usually some sort of engagement component. So the Moving Forward Together plan would have been a great example. We had, you know, the largest engagement, I think, in HRM history in terms of the number of people we talked to went into that. So project engagement is one. You know, we do have it did admittedly slow down a little bit through COVID, but we do have a monthly Talk Transit survey where we will put a question out to the public. Just, you know, it can be anything from, you know, perceptions of safety on board to bus stops, or, you know, anything to do with transit. And that goes out monthly to just try to get that more regular input. So it's not project based, but it's kind of what's a hot topic right now, what could we benefit from hearing from the public about, and you know, we'll put that out, and then usually we'll report those results back through the Transportation Standing Committee. And then the third one, of course, is kind of ad hoc. You mentioned 311, so certainly we do get a large amount of input through our customer contact centers, and it does come to staff. We do see it, we do read it, and you know, from time to time we do make changes based on it. You know, again, not everything can be actioned, but when things do come in that can be actioned, we will certainly do so. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, if that helps, a bit of an overview of the ways we try to try and stay in touch with our customers and residents.
Thank you. That's fantastic. The monthly Talk Transit survey, is that what Councillor Cleary just posted there? It's right on Shape Your City.
I saw a Shape Your City link pop up. I'm guessing that's probably what it was.
So would we be able to, as counselors, like post that to our social media or put a link on there or for people to, that's fantastic.
Absolutely,
I didn't know.
yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really good.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Tuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Dave. I too want to say thank you for all the work in the past year. I know it has always been a big, adjustment for so many people, and anyway, thank you for that. I'm just going to jump into my questions here. One of them is about kind of working on the regional transit or the rural transit, and I didn't see any of that in the report or in the presentation, and I'm just wondering where that fits into this whole budget this year. Now I'm going to comment too on things that some of my colleagues have talked about, which is the park and ride terminals, and I'm just wondering how much of a priority is this for Halifax Transit, increasing the park and rides? And can we expect to see them expanded, the ones that are at capacity and are being really well used, and adding new ones? Where does the whole expansion of park and ride terminals fit into the larger strategy, and how will we be planning for that and budgeting for that in this year and future years? I just want to know if there's any discussions going on with the province around a regional transit system, and how that work might be reflected in this budget, if at all. And the moving forward together positions that are listed, I'm just wondering, are those permanent positions that we can expect to see ongoing, or are they project specific to really implementing the moving forward together plan? And what would the kind of timeline for that be? I have a bunch of other questions, but maybe I'll come back, because that's a slew. I'll just end with one more. Try to get one more off my list here, which is the budget. I know we pre-approved some expenditures for replacement buses. I'm just wondering if we have any clearer idea of how much of that budget is actually going to be used this year, and if there's any impact on the budget at all.
Okay, thanks for your questions, Councillor. Through the chair, maybe I'll start with the last one first. So the budgeted amount that would have been put forward for replacement buses would have been the full amount we needed. So, we'd expect that would be all expended on the order for replacement buses. So let's go back through. So rural transit, I didn't mention it in my slides, but the rural transit funding program is of course still in our budget this year. And the funding levels for that, after speaking with the various operators, have been set at the pre-COVID levels, and then we'll adjust as we go through the year, depending on what their ridership levels are. But so that is in there. In terms of park and rides, I guess a little bit of context for park and ride lots. There are certain contexts where they do make a lot of sense. Rural is a great place where they make sense, where it's difficult to get into communities with fixed route transit, things like ferry terminals where you don't necessarily have a lot of people living around them. But on the whole, park and rides make up about 1.5% to 2% of our ridership. So they actually don't have a huge impact in terms of the number of people that use our system. Most people, the vast majority of people, do use our system by accessing it in their local neighborhood, which is what we try to emphasize for those that can do that. So, but having said that, I mean, we do have West Bedford coming this year. That was a good opportunity there. Margison Road Park and Ride would be the next one. That is some years out, but it is on the plan. Expanding park and ride lots is incredibly challenging, and that kind of actually ties into my reluctance to do a lot of reliance on park and ride lots, is that when they fill up, there's often not the opportunity to expand them. And then you get into people potentially being frustrated because their lot is full at 7 o'clock. Which is why when you look at the structure of the Moving Forward Together plan, and specifically how we've structured the peak hour express routes, we've tried to shift those away from being very park and ride focused. Like I'll use Sackville as an example. The Metrolink used to start at the park and ride lot, that was it, and it would go right downtown, so very park and ride dependent. Whereas what we've done is we've basically taken that route and then we extend it out into the suburban communities, so that people that otherwise may have been driving into the park and ride lot can now have the option to get on the bus in their neighborhood, and leave that park and ride space for those, maybe who are coming in on the 101 or don't have local transit. So that's kind of the approach to park and ride lots that we've been taking. But there are a few, obviously, in places where it does make sense. Province regional transit system, I have not been involved in any discussions with the province on a regional system, so I don't have anything on that. Moving forward together plan. So the positions, if I were just to go back through my slide deck here. So I mentioned that there were temporary positions and then moving forward together positions. So the moving forward together specific positions, they would be permanent because those are bus operators, mechanics, people that are needed to support the growing service. I think it was 17 positions are temporary. Yeah, so there's
Slide 13 is showing 17.1 positions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the 17.1 positions, those are temporary positions, and that represents the ramp up of people we needed to do the nightly sanitizing of the buses and all that additional COVID cleaning work. So, those ones are not permanent positions.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Dave and your team for ongoing support and work for the many different aspects of transit. Anytime I need help with anything transit related, team's always there in a jiffy. So always thanks for that. So I'll ask my quick questions and then right off to the sunset. With the changes with all the bus rapid transit and the bus lanes and everything that we're doing, I'm curious on how we will continue to monitor those changes, because obviously some of these changes are big for some areas, some of them are much needed. So what we'll be doing to review, because perfect example with the Goddison Street bus lane, we stayed reviewing that as much as we can, and we made changes when seen fit. So just wondering, as we roll these out in other communities, what we'll be doing to monitor these projects and make sure that we're continuing to make changes if needed. At what point will we have the technology to track bus speeds at real time using quotations? I know that we can do it in some cases, but not all cases. So I'm wondering if that is something that I know we've talked about it, and I'm just wondering at what point you think we'll be able to track speeds and help with that reviewing of the initiatives that we're moving forward. One specifically to my district, I know North Street and Gottingen was a capital project we were looking at in the future. Just wondering if there's been any update on that, because there was going to be some realignment, one for buses being able to go south going down Gottingen, but also there was going to be some infrastructure changes there, and I haven't heard anything on that project. So I'm just wondering if there's an update, and if not now, maybe you could just send an email and get some information. And the last one, budget related, revenue. How much revenue do we get from the advertising on our buses? I know that is something that we've done for a long time, and I'm just curious on that revenue. And I do have questions on the advertising in general. I won't do that today, but I'm just wondering how much revenue we actually bring in from that. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you for your questions, Councillor. Through the chair. So in terms of advertising revenue, I'm just looking through here. It looks to be about $1 million per year of overall revenue that comes in through that. So in terms of bus speeds, so we are able to monitor bus speeds through our operations center, and I know there's some data we can pull out of there. So I wasn't sure if that was relating to like the public being able to see it necessarily, or just for our own review. But yeah, we can certainly we do have the ability to go back through and pull like some average running times from which we can kind of infer average speeds and things like that in terms of the reviewing the effectiveness of the various transit priority measures. So I think basically, related back to that in terms of how do we monitor the impacts or the success of the various projects we're doing. There are multiple things that we can do. In terms of looking at those running times, in terms of looking at the impact of ridership, and then also generally, working with our colleagues in the transportation planning group, just keeping tabs on how it's actually functioning. If we put in a new bus lane, for example, Godergen's a great example of this. How is it functioning? Is it doing what it was intended to? And then, as you know, in the case of Godegen, we were able to roll back the hours a little bit because they weren't needed at what was initially there. So so I mean, any project, any kind of major project, there's certainly ongoing monitoring in those areas that goes with it. In terms of North and Godegen, I don't have any information on that. We can get something else out to you. I'm suspecting that's tied into the McDonald Bridge ramp work as well, though. I think that's all kind of connected, but I can certainly, we can get some information out to you on that.
Okay, thank you. If Councillor Smith, if you don't have anything else, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you, David, to you and to your team. Just a couple of comments from me and then a question. First of all, as we transition our mobile food market to our purpose-built vehicle, which is awesome and wonderful, I just want to acknowledge the great support that you and your team gave the mobile food market in its nascency. We started off right in this office with this idea of trying to get into food deserts, and somebody said, well, what about a bus? And somebody else said, oh, they'll Metro Transit at the time. Well, they can't do that. They haven't got the resources. Anyway, we went to, I don't know, it was you or Eddie or Patricia, who it was. And right off the bat, there was cooperation, and you've supported that initiative. And now that we've moved to this beautiful new vehicle, which is going to make it even better for people so that we can serve our constituents, I want to thank you and whoever worked at Transit on that. So thank you for that. I also want to just echo something that, and I wanted to say this, and Councillor Blackburn spoke to it already, that I've said many times that I wish everybody could see our senior team in a time of crisis. I really do. I don't wish for another crisis, but I've been in the EOC for snowstorms, when we had, water issues, fires, and folks who've been deputy mayor like Lisa last year have the opportunity, a burden perhaps, but an opportunity to see this team work. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of when this all sort of just landed on us. It was March the 12th of last year that I went into isolation because of some, distant connection to potential COVID at the time that just, was just starting to freak people out. And then the following Monday, Jacques and I, in a conversation, Jacques invited myself and I invited Lisa to come on these regular calls, starting at the EOC. And every time I'm in that EOC with folks like you, I feel extraordinarily proud and really quite humbled at the team that we have and the pressure that you're under. And from those meetings, we invited you to come on calls with councillors. First of all, 3 days a week, and then it was 2 days a week. And I don't think you ever missed those calls. And I know that you've got lots of other things you're working on. And I know the stress that our operators have been under. And I know the stress our mechanics have been under. And I know the stress that everybody at Transit and every other department in the city has been under. But to see this team, well led by Jacques, with Erica quite often in the times of crisis, was really very impressive. And so I want to say that again and let you know I appreciate how much people like you and Denise took a big heavy load last year as things were changing day by day. Regulations about parks were changing, what we could do, what we couldn't do, hour by hour in some cases, and you faced the same thing, and you worked with Dr. Strang in his office, even at a point in time when there were people in Nova Scotia who didn't know what Dr. Strang was. There aren't many of them now, but you worked with him, so thank you for that. I have a question, Dave. Just a very short one. First, in terms of vaccinations, are our operators, where do our operators fit in terms of the vaccination lines? And number two, smaller municipalities in Nova Scotia that are trying to get into transit look to us for help and leadership. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to how, I know you work with the big city mayors a lot, the big city bus directors. How do you work with some of the municipalities that we really want to support as they try to move more and more towards public transit? So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your, yeah, sorry, I'm almost speechless here. Thank you for your comments, your kind comments. I do really appreciate it. I know the team certainly does appreciate it as well. Thank you, thank you. In terms of vaccines, so I mean, we really don't have a lot of involvement in that directly. Certainly, just working any advice from public health on that. So I mean, my understanding is that public health is is doing it age-based, and that operators would fall into that. That's all the information I have at this point in time. I haven't heard anything different from Dr. Strang and his team on that. In terms of small systems, so yeah, so we certainly, I always kind of see ourselves as like the older sibling, I guess, to transit systems in Atlantic Canada, because we are much larger than most of them. We have much more resources than the rest of them, and we certainly, I always use that to try and help others. Whether it's my colleagues in New Brunswick or smaller systems in Nova Scotia like Kings and Cape Breton and Bridgewater, and all these great smaller systems that have been popping up over the last few years. We provide help through expertise wherever we can, any knowledge we can provide them, but also we frequently donated some of our older vehicles to them in cases where it could be helpful for them. So yeah, certainly I really do enjoy and take pride in helping transit flourish throughout Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada beyond just HRM.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are no first-time speakers left in the list, so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes for a couple of comments and then hand it off to those speakers who have signed up for a second time. First of all, I want to echo what everybody else has been saying about this being near the anniversary. I regularly think of Friday the 13th as the day that COVID hit Halifax, because it's a memorable day, and it was really the first day, I think, that most of the councillors did lock themselves down for a good chunk of the weekend. And then we saw just a year like we haven't seen before, and hopefully a year like we won't see again. But I do appreciate the effort that everybody went through, recognizing the stress and the anxiety that the entire world, that the entire city of Halifax and with the outlying areas and all of the employees and all of the and everybody was just going through, not knowing what was going on, and legitimately scared. So I'm glad to see that so many people stepped up to the plate, so thank you. On to transit itself. You had mentioned that we don't get very much ridership from the park and rides. Part of that, and I appreciate that that you mentioned the Sackville Terminal and the 101. Part of that is because the Sackville Terminal does fill up from people who are coming in from the 101, from Windsor and Kentville and things like that. So there is less room for those people in Sackville who would go to that terminal. And I appreciate the allowances that have been made taking the bus route locally. But I would advocate strongly for moving forward with the Murchison Drive Park and Ride. I recognize that it's a challenge. I'm hoping you'll be able to get there soon. And I appreciate that it is the second one on the list, so thank you very much for that. The second thing is the fare management project, the RFP that is going out shortly. I hope that the capabilities that are being discussed are being added to what's already there, and that we aren't taking things away. Transit has to support some of the most vulnerable users, some of the most vulnerable citizens that we've got. So two of those things that allow them to use transit are cash and tickets. And there has been discussion in the past about these going cashless, and that set the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. So I hope that what you're looking at with the new fare management project will not remove cashless or tickets and simply add capabilities. I'll just leave it at that, and I hope for look for your response. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on fare, I can confirm that that nothing is going away. This is strictly in addition. So, people who wish to continue to pay cash can certainly do so. I mean, we hope people will shift to the electronic media, but certainly if they don't, then they will still be able to pay to get on the bus. So yeah, no worries there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now proceeding with those who have signed up a second time, Councillor Mancini, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave, just wanted to continue our conversation around excessive bus, and thanks for that explanation. You explained before the new changes, the eligibility, the data terminal. The biggest issue, what I had heard from day one when I first got elected, and we've improved dramatically, is the booking, right? And so that was a real bottleneck, and that caused a lot of aggravation and pain for our riders. And I believe that's improved. Is it still the 7 days you have to book in advance? And is that going to change with regard to, is it going to be sooner? I know that it can't be like a taxi service, and the new taxi accessibility program, hopefully will address that immediate need for a vehicle. But if you could just talk about the booking system, where it is now and where it's going.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. So in terms of the booking system, I guess I'll start with the timing of it. So, I mean, we'll take bookings up to 7 days out, but certainly people can book sooner than that and still get rides. Obviously the sooner you book it, the better the chances. But I mean, what I would say right now with the reduction in ridership we're seeing through COVID, there are very, very, very few trips that we're not providing. I mean, on a monthly basis, almost every trip is being accommodated.
That's so, because the ridership has gone down, though.
Just because the ridership has gone down. Yeah. So, I mean, what that does, it gives us a little bit of a reprieve in terms of having trips being denied as we look to repair everything else. And, ultimately where we'd like to get to is having an option for online booking. Right. Again, that doesn't mean the phone option goes away, but we want to get to an option for online booking so that people don't have to, I mean, personally, if I have an online option versus calling someone for anything, I'll take that. So looking to get into that to streamline the process as well.
Okay, thank you. Moving away from excessive bus, and Councillor Daigle-Gammon mentioned in her comments, she brought up Port Wallace. So Port Wallace, as you know, and I know your staff is engaged with our staff with regard to the Port Wallace development. Port Wallace development is going to be a significant development in the Dartmouth area. We're talking 10,000 people. And I want to make sure that transit is going to establish those routes once Port Wallace gets started right off the bat. The last thing that we want to see is Port Wallace be developed and then transit consider the route option. So can you just speak to that, what those conversations are? And you sort of add Shannon Park to that equation also.
Certainly. So thank you, Councillor. So in terms of Port Wallace, I mean, it's always our preference to have service introduced into a community as it's built. Ultimately that comes down to budgets, and the other thing it comes down to is actually how subdivisions like that are built. In terms of, we can't go into a subdivision if it's, say, full of dead end roads as the roads are completed. So we need a way to physically get the bus through the subdivision, and that routing often.
Dave, are you having those conversations with our staff? Because now's the time to be having those conversations, right?
Yeah. So we're working closely with our colleagues in planning and development in terms of these matters, in terms of what the development looks like, and just in terms of that. But so that's kind of there. But yeah, certainly in an ideal world, transit is always in from day one. You want to get transit in there before people have the opportunity to buy the second and third vehicle and develop those sorts of habits.
Good, thank you. Burnside is the other one I want to bring up. Prior to COVID, you were going to introduce some new route changes. That's been delayed. Are those new changes to Burnside going now to be happening in November when you're introducing these other changes also?
I don't believe there's anything for Burnside. We this time around we had done a number of changes. I'm just scanning through the route here in case I've forgotten something. No, because we had done quite a number of changes in Burnside a few years ago when we reshaped some of the service there. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything left. Anything remaining for Burnside would be coming next year.
Okay.
I know there was some talk about. I'm just thinking now up around like IKEA in that area, but
Yeah.
that's not in this year's plan.
Still, I know my time is running out. There is probably passed very quickly. Still, the number one complaint I get from the businesses in Burnside is the inability for their staff to move around Burnside. And I realize, Dave, that if we were to build Burnside today, we would build it differently, and that's part of the challenge. But it is number one. When I speak to the businesses, how can we move our people around Burnside? So anyhow, I'll come back one more time. Thank you, Dave. Mr. Chair, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hensby for a second time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My questions are going to be about our regional transportation tax. It's now been 15 years since the regional plan has come into effect, and with that came the regional transportation tax, and that goes the rural commuter shed. If people are not familiar with it, it's basically a 45-minute drive to get into Metro. So basically it goes from Hubbards to Enfield and then into East Hants and West Hants boundaries to the west on Lunenburg, and on the eastern region as far as Oyster Pond. And all I have to show for it is one park and ride terminal at Porter's Lake. We've been paying that tax for 15 years, hoping to get some more infrastructure. I'm in a transit desert out there. You know, back in 2005, Lawrencetown was promised to have a transit study done. That got changed when regional plan came into effect. Now we're trying to implement a 207 service with Musco riders. So I'm hoping that kind of money will still be available for those type of projects. You know, we had $200,000 set aside from last year's capital budget it's in reserve for the 207 to acquire the buses. I hope that money is still available for us to access. We're still waiting for confirmation from the province to move forward with the acquisition of the 207 service. So you're planning to have adjustments to the 401 service to cut out the service from West Chesapeake, Grand Desert, and Seaforth. Is there a timeline when that may be proposed? Because we have had discussions in the past that we were hoping to have a seamless transition from one service to another. When the 401 finished on a Friday, the Musco 207 service would start on a Monday. But now this is all up in the air because COVID has put a kink in a lot of plans in regards to coordination, acquisition of buses, and trying to get people up and running and other budget demands. So the 401 service adjustments, I'd like to know when you anticipate those to be coming into effect. Also, with the accessible bus stops, I have a population base in the Lake Echo area that are blind, and I need to have a couple of tactile bus stops along Highway number 7 in Lake Echo for our blind citizens that use the bus quite regularly. So I'd hope that we can look at that as a possible site for a couple accessible bus stops in the rural area along for bus service 401. And also like to know in regards to Wi-Fi, what is the status of Wi-Fi in the buses? You know, it's something we talked about in the past. I want to know where it stands at now. And I'm also curious about the particular route changes for 61 and 58. I'm very happy to see the North Preston bus service going down Main Street and then turning left on the Forest Hills Parkway. But then you have it turning up and going up into the subdivision there off of Circassian Drive and then coming back out on Otega. Back Harbor Road. I thought it'd been simpler for that bus to go straight out Forest Hills Parkway, then turn right on Cole Harbor Road, and perhaps have your 58 service do that neighborhood run. Because the 58 service you have doing that Forest Hills run, then turning right on Cole Harbor Road. I thought the 58 service would be better to serve the subdivision area off of Circassian and Otega. So, just kind of curious about why that particular route has been proposed for 61, and still I'll be advocating for exit 18. I'll be putting a report or request for a report through regional council to at least initiate the process to get it onto the radar because it's long overdue. I've been asking for quite some time and it needs to be done. So those are my questions. So you can take me off the list for the third time unless something else comes up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hensby. Go ahead, Mr. Riggi.
Thank you, Councillor, for those questions. Through the chair, where do I start? Okay, so Wi-Fi I'll go with first. So I don't have a current status on that, though we can certainly submit that. I know a lot of the work on that did end up being delayed due to COVID, but we can certainly we'll touch base with ICT on that and can provide an update. The 6168. You basically, Councillor, just perfectly described some of the dilemmas we face when we're planning transit routes. You know, and that's when we look at the 68 and the 61, when they get to the corner of, say, Arklow and Forest Hills Parkway, which one should go where? And what we try to do is we try to balance off, you know, directness and also serving areas of the community. So if I recall way back when we were initially doing these conversations, where the 61 had a pretty direct routing down Highway 7 and then Forest Hills Parkway, we thought, you know, out of balance, it would be good to take that through Circassian, whereas where the 68 was taking a little bit had to take a bit of a circuitous routing through the Auburn Arklow area. We thought it made sense for that to get the straight shot on Forest Hills Parkway and Clarabor Road. I mean, obviously those could have been interchanged, but I think that was kind of the.
Talk about 58, not 68. 58.
58. Are you speaking of the Cherrybrook route, Councillor, or?
Oh, that's 68. I was talking about 58.
Listed as
would this have an impact on the budget discussions? And if not, would it make more sense?
Would that be the Woodlawn Express?
Yeah, unless there was a recommendation.
Excuse me. Would this have an impact on the budget discussions or a vote? And would it be more appropriate to move this into more one-on-one chat?
Well, it's part of the service plan proposals and the modification of routes. So the question is, where does it get changed? Here? Because if we approve the motion today now, then it goes forward. You know, perhaps I may want to ask for a supplementary report asking for just a clarification of bus route 61 Express and the 58 in regards to the subdivision area. Or just maybe they can just clarify. Maybe they just clarify the logic.
Go ahead, Councillor Mason.
Order, David. The routing plan was approved by council in 2016. So the right place to debate that, like those changes, is council, right? You know, we can ask for supplementary reports and all that, but you were there when it was voted on. So you know, again, as I said in my talking points, council is being asked, do you feel we missed anything in the budget that we're presenting to do what you already asked us to do? So we've already had that debate, and it can be opened up again, but that's not really a budget consideration. That's something that council can discuss.
And feel free to bring a motion forward through council, but I'm not sure that is part of the discussion today. Would you like to?
I'd ask for the logic of those roadies for 61 and 58 in particular, in regards to the subdivision area. Just curious of why they did that.
Would you be able to have that as an offline conversation, or would you rather a staff report for that?
Offline be fine.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Feel free to proceed, Mr. Riggi.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of Musco, yes, the funding is still available, as you would outline. So that is there. You know, should they get to go, I guess it's the provincial funding they're waiting on. Our portion is ready to go. Route 401 timing. So it is the intent to proceed with the changes in November with the rest of the changes. Council may recall that this was originally slated to happen last year. And there was agreement to defer it to do consultation on the idea of operating through Mineville or what other changes could happen. So, you know, that consultation is complete, and the intention is to go ahead this November at the same time as the rest of the route changes. And then in terms of the accessible bus stops, Councillor Hensby, if you have some specifics on that, if you could send that to us, that would be really helpful. As I mentioned, we'll be engaging a consultant to do an overall review, but if there's some local knowledge like that, then that certainly is helpful, and we can include that with what we provide the consultant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Our illustrious mayor and my fellow colleagues have spoke so well about their appreciation for the work of Halifax Transit during the during our COVID experiences. And so I would also like to add my thanks and appreciation. I do have a very personal experience with Metro Transit and Accessibus as Executive Director of DASC. And I would say that on the day that the first Accessibuses came back and brought our clients back to work, there was nobody that exhibited more joy at people being able to be back in their social enterprise and working as your transit drivers. They were amazing. Tears in the eyes, the whole thing. It was a very special experience. So I should have started off with that, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
So back to my now other new community that I need to support in Route 55. And thank you so much to my fellow councillors for helping through all of this, and especially to Councillor Mancini. Your support is very much appreciated in understanding and how we move this forward and how we can get to a better result. And sometimes it is about making sure that the misinformation is corrected. So from what I think now, my ask is if we could have a briefing note instead of a report, the briefing note that gives us the information about what was considered a response to the petition that was provided, what could happen, what couldn't happen. And then to solidify that, is there a way then that Transit would engage with me in a virtual meeting with the community members that we could set up so that there's really good engagement? That way, and to Councillor Mason's point, is this a budgetary conversation? That way, if the result of that does impact that, we want to come forward and say no change, or wow, through this beautiful consultation, we've found something differently and it may impact the budget. So that's where I would like to reside. Dave, do you think that's possible?
So through the chair, so kind of thinking on the fly here. I mean, so certainly, a briefing note in response to petition, that's easy to do. In terms of a virtual meeting, I guess it comes down to what we're hoping to get out of that. I mean, ultimately, we have a council direction, so that's kind of where we are right now. Should council choose to give us another direction, then we will go in that direction. Part of the challenge for us is timing, in that in order to get everything ready to go for November, like we really need a solid council approval of the annual service plan, or if there's any amendments, to have that very clearly approved by the time budget is approved there in early May. So I guess that's, so if there's a thought that there's going to be something coming through with budget implications, I'm suspecting that needs to go into the parking lot. I defer obviously to the chair on this. That would need to be a parking lot item that we would then bring forward information on for council to decide and give us direction.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Councillor Jacob-Gammon, would you like to? I see John Trace has just popped up. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just suggest, start with the briefing note, and then based on that, may need to actually go to council, as Councillor Mason has indicated, to revisit council's decision on the strategy. So I would simply suggest that you start with a briefing note and then take it from there before planning anything else.
Okay, so
to meet with the community virtually is not something that you would consider?
I think, Councillor, I think Councillor, staff needs to consider, and take a look exactly what happened, and then determine if they need direction from council before committing to meet further. Because if council has given direction and that's where it is, then the meeting's quite short. It effectively doesn't do you much good. I think you're better off, reflecting on the briefing note and then deciding if you want to go take something to council, if needed.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Councillor Jacob-Gammon, would you like to proceed with the briefing note?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I second that if that's needed.
And this would be a briefing note. I gather you and the clerk have discussed the details of this, and Mr. Riggi knows what to expect.
Now.
Kathy, yeah, you just were quiet there for a second.
Sorry, so to provide a briefing note regarding the residents' concerns around the planned change to Route 55 to service Craigburn Drive and outlining other options that were considered and may be considered in the area.
Okay, so we have Councillor Mancini seconding that request for a briefing note. Councillor Mancini, go ahead.
If I may speak to this, because I was part of it, just for my colleagues, and I know Dave knows this, but prior to the election, the community requested to meet with the Councillor Stretch at the time. They had a community meeting outside. I joined them to support him and the community. The conversation, the request was take this petition back to council. He did that. He did not ask for, there was no motion. He didn't ask for a report at the time. I think his intent was to bring it up after the election, when we know the results of the election. And then we had COVID hit, and there was going to be some communication and engagement with the community based on the information that Transit gave us. And then all of a sudden, Transit sends the note to the councillor about the changes happening in November, including Route 55, and then the community feels left out. And that's why the request for a virtual meeting. It's not to single out or Dave to put, you know, I know Kathy and myself have no intent to hang staff out to dry. The residents are asking, they're bringing forward questions about the rationale for the change, the feasibility of the change, the route. They're just looking for that information, and going through the councillor and then her to have to come back to you each time and ask questions, it's cumbersome. That's why the request for a virtual meeting is made. And I would ask that you have staff do that, and the councillor and I'll be there to help support both the transit and the councillor and the community to make sure it's done respectfully, not to hang anybody out to dry. So I support the motion on the floor for a briefing note, but I also ask Dave that you consider a virtual meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If there are any other speakers to this motion, the request for the briefing note, please indicate that in the chat.
Just quickly, Chair, are we requesting a briefing note and a virtual meeting, or just a briefing note? Because if we want to give direction to staff to have a virtual meeting, we better do it now. Do it through the CAO to staff.
The motion has just been pasted into the chat, and it talks about a briefing note as being the only request.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I understand from our legal counsel, John Hughes, that whether or not a virtual meeting really would be a waste of anybody's time. And so we absolutely don't want to do that with transit, absolutely. But it is demonstrating some respect to the community. And maybe it is a unique situation because they were waiting for something and didn't get it. So.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for bringing this up, Kathy. It's kind of interesting to hear what was happening there, because, I've had similar experience in regards to the communication around route changes here in Purcell's Cove, in particular around what's now the 415, when notice was given like on a Friday for a route change that happened on a Monday with no rationale and no real communication around that. And with, repeated requests, I still don't really understand. I was told there was extensive consultation, but I haven't actually met anyone who's been consulted with about those changes. And so I do have questions in regards to how transit meets with communities, advertises route changes, makes people feel part of the system. Because, when things like this happen, it really turns people off transit. And that's not what I think the goal is. And when councillors can't really get that clear communication about why these changes happened, it puts us in this position that isn't really helping support the broader goals of the city around transit and trying to find ways to make it work. So I think this briefing note is specific to Route 55. I don't know if there's an ability to add something to that motion around a briefing note about how planned route changes are communicated in general.
My take on that, and feel free to correct me, Mr. Traves, is that would be a change in the intent of the motion. So it would either be a second motion or some other type of amendment to it.
If I could, Mr. Chair, if there's an interest on the part of council generally for information on the process we go through for route changes and the engagement and communication, I think we can do that outside the budget process. I mean, that's just, in my view, general information. So I don't think we would. I wouldn't think I need a motion for that. We can just do that.
Go ahead, Councillor Cuttle.
Right, so that would be wonderful. I have been working with, sending communication with Patricia Hughes. I do have a meeting that, call owed. We don't have a meeting scheduled, but I just think it's worth noting that there is some gap, and I'll let this motion go, and I'll come back with my speaking on the main motion after. But it has to do with this as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, and I get kind of the discussion we're having because we've got a lot of new councillors who are representing areas where changes happened previously, and now they're inserted into right after the change is happening or right before the change is happening with no effect on the change that was discussed. And so I just wanted to add a few notes in here that, so when we talk about engagement with community consultation, the Moving Forward Together plan, which is a 5-year plan, that consultation happened even before I became a councillor, because the Moving Forward Together plan actually came in at the end of 2016. There was a bit of an attempt at a bun fight just as it came onto the floor, as we had like 20 or 16 or 23 amendments, I forget how many, proposed. And it was, of course, district versus district. I want my bus. No, I want my bus. And that's clearly not feasible. So it was a well thought out plan that was consulted a fair bit before it was planned. As each piece comes together, there's lots of interim consultation. So I know Councillor Adams and myself met with many people, I think all 6 riders of the number 15 bus, about the changes that it would create when it became the 415. And so, there were lots of opportunities for consultation at the Transportation Standing Committee. A petition was sent in. There were presentations provided by a group trying to save the bus in its current form. And so there were lots and lots of consultation, tons of consultation. And so I think what Councillor Mason has suggested, what the chair has suggested, what others have suggested, is that there are appropriate venues to have certain types of discussions. And getting down into this route changes and this route doesn't change, that's really a council or transportation standing committee kind of decision. As Councillor Mason has pointed out, what we're looking for here is to support the goals that council's already established and the plans that council's already established. And one of those plans, especially when it comes to transit, the topic we're dealing with today, was to rebalance from where we had too much focus on coverage and an inefficient system to a focus on higher ridership and a more efficient transit system. And so that is a goal of council. That's what we're trying to do. And that's why ridership blew up pre-COVID as we were making these changes, and why actually we have had, and perhaps Mr. Reed can just comment on this a bit because I don't think he's mentioned it yet. Yes, our ridership may be about half of what it was pre-COVID, but compared to a lot of other transit systems and a lot of other major cities in North America, we're actually doing very well. And I want to surmise one of the reasons why we're still doing quite well in terms of our high ridership relative to other cities is because of all the great changes that we've been making and this great staff support that transit has provided. So as a question, maybe Mr. Reed, you could just offer a comment on in his experience, because I know he's part of CUDA and I know he's attuned to what's going on in the rest of North America, how are we comparing in terms of reaching our goals and faring through COVID compared to a lot of other systems?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, through the chair. So yeah, in terms of faring through COVID, we're definitely at the upper end of things. I mean, there's systems out there that are like 20% ridership and everything in between. So to be above half, we're doing quite well compared to systems across North America.
Thank you, Mr. Reedy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of points to say on this motion. There's a couple of things that have kind of been raised here that brought a little bit of a concern to me. Originally, I wanted to get on and just say that I'm certainly going to support the motion for the item part of the motion that is around the briefing note. I think Councillor Daigle-Gammon and many other of us as new councillors who were not part of that process in the past have every right to ask for that information, and I think all of council should support that. I'm a little concerned with the degree of which we're down into the weeds in the operational layer around asking for an online virtual meeting. I think any of us can take our considerations and requests for that to any staff department and have a conversation offline and specific to your need of your constituents to do that. I'm not convinced that needs to be an emotion. As similar to we have a council engagement process on decisions of council that require public hearings and such, but outside of that, really, the rest of us all have to do the same thing, which is to champion for opportunities with staff, with our constituents. So on that, Councillor Daigle, I'm certainly happy to support your briefing note. I have a similar situation that I'm going to bring forward in my second chance to speak on a situation in the change of routes options here. The other part that I just want to note on this, but it's this notion, and I'm just going to throw it out here, and I'll probably mention it again, Mr. Chair, but this notion that high ridership is the priority. There's a lot of us that have underserved districts and underserved areas within our district, and if we don't have transit, how can you possibly suggest that we're going to be evaluated the same when we don't give the community the option of showing that there would be high ridership. So I'm going to challenge that a little bit, but I'll leave it there. I am happy to support the motion, and I'm looking forward to my second chance to speak on the main motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Austin speaking for the first time on the briefing note. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if it's helpful. I mean, I think Councillor Mason was on the right track, and I'm just going to remind Council, and I know it came through before the election, so it's, some of the new councillors wouldn't have had a chance to see it firsthand. But I mean, if there is a want of changing things in the plan, I mean, we can do that. We can do that through Transportation Standing Committee, through Regional Council. Councillor Outhit had a situation in Bedford where there was the bus routing was going to go down a street where some residents didn't want it on that road. And ultimately, council by a slim majority agreed to move the bus to a different street as a result. So, I mean, there is an avenue to revisit changes if it's desired. It's just not today, in my opinion, that has to come through Transportation Standing Committee and through Regional Council, and that's what we did when there was a tweak that was desired. So I think, and I also think of all the attempts at trying to save the Sambro Loop bus. I mean, that was at Regional Council too. That wasn't at budget committee discussions. So I think today if you have concerns about routing, I mean, I think the thing to do is to take it away, talk to staff, and then bring it forward either at Transportation Standing Committee or at Regional Council. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Cuddle, on your second time on the briefing note.
Yes, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Sean. I am not actually talking about the reduction of the service of the 15 to the 415. I'm actually talking about a change in the schedule to the 415 that happened after the reduction of service and the lack of communication. My questions have to do with communication to community, and when I look at the route changes proposed in this budget, I'm wondering where is some emphasis on communicating with communities around changes and the consultation process. So for the 4:15, they changed the timing. So now the last bus is at 4:45 as opposed to 6:45. There was no notice given, or as far as I can tell, consultation with the broader community around that route change. And we can talk about the reduction in service and the reduction in ridership, but that's happened across the board and everywhere. So I'm gonna just leave that there and bring see where we go with this motion, Kathy's motion on the floor, and kind of bring that conversation back to the main motion. But I'm not talking about routing changes, I'm talking about scheduling, which there's a number of schedule changes in the budget document. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any further speakers in the chat.
Mr. Chair, just a sec, just briefly, it's Tim.
Yes.
I just think this is a little unfortunate today, particularly since we have so many new councillors who are just trying to learn and are trying to respond to the questions that they're hearing from the district and their own concerns. Today we are discussing the transit budget, but it's also the transit business plan. So if the councillors have concerns about the business plan portion of this, when should that be brought up? When should that be discussed? If today is really to talk about the budget for all the things that have happened over the past months and years and whatnot, when do they actually get a chance to, this would be with their the annual business service plan? I mean, when do these councillors get a chance, all of us, to really get into the weeds and say, today we don't want to just talk about the high level budget, but we want to talk about the business plan, and we want to suggest our communications issues, etc. And of course, those things do affect budget. So should we be breaking these two things apart? Should we be doing something sooner? Dave, I'd like to have your thoughts on that, because I think you're hearing now that we've got some really good new folks here who just want to be able to answer some questions properly to the people that have elected them.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. So through the chair, so today we are a little different than most other business units in that in addition to the budget document, the annual service plan is here as well today. So typically what we do is, for councillors that do have significant impacts, we will talk to them before it comes here. I understand, with specific to the Route 55, there's a little bit of confusion on our part in terms of, the relationship, I guess, between which councillor actually represented the area. We own that. So if we go back a little bit in history, there was actually a motion, this goes back as far as Councillor McCluskey when she was here, that was approved by council, that we were to bring our annual service plan at minimum 1 month before the approval of budget, which we're here today, I guess, basically with that. So, our ideally, at the end of the day, we need to come out at budget approval with clear direction from council on what we're doing this year in order to be able to get that into place by November. So, certainly if there's questions around the annual service plan today, then certainly we can try to answer those as best we can and kind of go from there. And I see CFO is here.
Thanks, Dave. And I think that's what Jane, I know you want to speak, but that's what I wanted to point out. This is different. This is the business plan as well as the budget. We do have a number of new colleagues, and I think for them to ask some of these questions during this time period today is quite reasonable, quite acceptable, and should be expected. And I don't think they should be chastised for doing it. And Jane, you want to speak now, and I will look forward to you. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor Outfit. Go ahead, Jane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Jane Fraser, CFO, through you to the Deputy Mayor. This is the appropriate time to talk about any business unit's business plan. The business plan really lays out what the executive directors and their teams are going to be accomplishing over certainly the current year or the upcoming year, and often over multi-year. So, and the budget is really what supports the ability to deliver on those initiatives that laid out in the business plan. So the two of them are very tightly woven together. So one is the what. So the business plan is what is going to be achieved and how that supports regional council's strategic objectives, and then the budget is the how and often the timing with that. So I would say that it's very appropriate for any business unit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Jane. And things might be very different next year, but I just think with so many new councillors and with these two things coming forward together, that's why I was just looking for a little bit of, excuse me, a little bit of flexibility here, which you've been doing, Mr. Chair. But anyway, I will let these folks get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other speakers to this motion, so I would ask for the clerk to call the roll, and let's proceed with the vote.
On the motion for the briefing note, beginning with District 5, Councillor Austin.
In favor.
6, Councillor Mancini.
I'm in favor of the motion.
7, Councillor Mason.
For the motion.
8, Councillor Smith. 9, Councillor Cleary.
Sure.
10, Councillor Morse.
In favor.
11, Councillor Cuddle.
In favor.
12, Councillor Stoddard.
The motion.
13, Councillor Lovelace.
Voting yes.
14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
15, Chair Russell.
In favor.
16, Deputy Mayor Outhead.
In favor.
1, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion with great appreciation to my fellow colleagues.
2, Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
3, Councillor Kent.
In favor.
4, Councillor Purdy.
Voting in favor.
Mayor Savage.
In favor?
Okay. Thank you. That motion for the briefing note passes. At this point, it is 11:57, and through an informal chat in the chat, we will be breaking for lunch now, and we'll return at 1 p.m. If I'm not mistaken, and clerk, please correct me if I'm wrong, we will be coming back to a different meeting for the councillors this afternoon.
You will, yes, that is correct. You'll be returning to the afternoon booking in your calendars.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to seeing everybody at 1 p.m.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councillor Stoddard, go ahead.
Is the main motion still on the floor?
The main motion is still on the floor, yes. And so we will be returning, and the speakers that I have on that motion are Councillors Kent and Cuddle.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you at 1 o'clock.
Thanks. Bye.
And to the clerk, it still looks like the camera is on me. It's not, it doesn't appear to be showing the slide.
We will make sure it is going on the slide in a second. Councillor Russell, I think if you log off, it'll probably help that as well. We're taking a look at it right now. Thank you.
And it seems to be okay now.
Are we coming back to this meeting or another one?
We're coming back to a different meeting.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.